So today, we return to the world of trade secrets to ask the questions that arise in the immediate aftermath of a theft of valuable trade secrets. This can happen anywhere in the world, at any time, and we reflect that as we move from country to country in pursuit of our thief, we will follow a story based on events which are also too common, if slightly exaggerated for effect and emphasis. Of course, not all the steps which might be taken to catch our thief fall within the comfort zone of the average intellectual property lawyer. Pursuit of someone intent on stealing their valuable secrets calls for agility, fast and lateral thinking, and a willingness to try anything lawful to get the desired result. Stand by for some very different ideas to those which you usually encounter on a day-to-day basis. This scenario allows us to explore different causes of actions and how you can mobilize civil procedures and government enforcement agencies, including criminal enforcement, for cause. The causes of action relate to trade secret laws, copyright, theft, the physical property, unauthorized access of computers, employment law, and more. The preliminary and emergency measures will differ across jurisdictions. So let's look forward to the case scenario, and we're going to play the video. So here, in my view, the first step that must be taken in parallel with the legal analysis is the preservation of evidence. Regardless of the jurisdiction, you will need quality evidence that can be presented to a court to assist our litigators. And is therefore as essential to work closely with IT forensic experts so that the appropriate measures are taken. The first step taken, we must evaluate where and how to recover the thumb drive and the documents. So we can now go to our panel of experts, but perhaps we can turn to Ivy, and she can sort of guide us through what they can do in China.
Yeah, thank you, Anita. Good morning, everyone. So as this emergent situation is happening in China, I'm thinking about two possible options to manage the crisis, namely the criminal action and the court orders in the civil proceedings. So considering the urgent situation right now, the first thing first is to hold back Ethel and the information she took away. So we need to find out in the first place where she's now. I assume that she's still in China, and make sure that she stays in our jurisdiction. So as the first step, I will introduce the criminal part first. Let's see what we can do with the criminal action. The best choice under this circumstance is to involve the public power, meaning the PSB, the police, to step in and to detain Ethel and Optimus' property she took away. So as the very first step, Optimus should instantly report to the police and assert that Ethel's conduct constitutes the crime of theft. In order to establish a criminal case, Optimus should submit the CCTV footage, as mentioned by Anita earlier, the proof of the ownership and value of the company laptop, the thumb drive, etc., to the police. And in the current situation, only the police can use their investigative power to locate and detain Ethel. And under the Chinese law, if the value of the stolen property is worth more than 1,000 RMB, meaning approximately 200 Canadian dollars, for example, the laptop, Ethel shall be arrested for 7 to 37 days for the police further investigations. And Optimus can prompt the police to search for any missing properties from the company. And in this way, Optimus can have more leeway to investigate further with the help of the police, and then can effectively secure the laptop and the thumb drive from being lost. And once we have the laptop, thumb drive, and relevant documents containing Optimus' trade secrets, Optimus can further assert that Ethel constitutes the crime of trade secret infringement as well under the Chinese criminal law. And in terms of evidence gathering, reporting the case to the PSP is of great significance because the evidence investigated and gathered by the PSP can then be used in subsequent administrative actions and civil proceedings in China and maybe in other jurisdictions as well.
Thank you. So it would be ideal for the PSB, and the PSB is the Public Service Bureau in China.
Yep.
To take actions, but are there available remedies in the civil proceedings in China?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Anita, because as double insurance, Optimus can simultaneously prepare a civil litigation for trade secret infringement in case the PSB considers that there's insufficient evidence to constitute a criminal offense and close the investigation, or allow Ethel to be released on bail. And Optimus is entitled to apply for an interim injunction to prohibit Ethel from using these trade secrets and to hand over the thumb drive, manual, documents, laptops, etc. And we can also apply for the court order to prohibit Ethel from leaving the country, China. It is not rare for Chinese court to issue this restriction order, especially when the defendant has the foreign nationality and is prompt to leave the country to avoid being sued and prosecuted.
Thank you. So unfortunately, despite our best efforts, and the efforts of the Chinese authorities, Ethel has got away. But we know where she is going. How do we know, Ivy?
Optimus can either get information from the PSB directly because we have reported to the police, and we are entitled to get the information from the PSB about to get to know where Ethel where the whereabouts of Ethel. Or we can, from the court, we can get the information from the court, because if Optimus successfully secure an interim injunction from the court will have to serve a restraining order on the immigration authorities, restricting Ethel from leaving the country. Optimus can therefore use the court to find out the enforcement of the court order and Ethel's whereabouts.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So from these sources and other sources, we learn that Ethel has actually come to Canada. Now we know that Ethel is headed for her home in Toronto, could be Ottawa, but that's what we said, presumably to collect some of her belongings. She does have a home in Ontario, and to take them for her new life with her new employers. And now we turn to Michael in Canada to say, okay, we know she's coming. What do we do?
Well, so we know she's boarded a flight from China to Canada, and with that advance notice, we can try and get an early jump on some enforcement. So while Ethel is sitting in the plane and deciding what movie that she might watch on the flight, we are busy in the office preparing court materials to try and enforce Optimus's rights. So there's really two big questions that you have to answer right off the bat. The first one is, which court are we going to go to get our enforcement remedies, and what are we going to ask for from the court? To answer the first question, it really depends on the type of material or intellectual property that's at issue. And then to answer the second question, it depends, but what's the relationship between Ethel and her company? Is there a contract, and what has she done? What laws has she broken? So in this case, we know that she's misappropriated trade secrets, misappropriated confidential information, and that's very likely contrary to her employment agreement. So the action against her in court is going to be primarily based on breach of her contract and breach of confidence, which is a tort that you can enforce in Ontario. And there may be other grounds to enforce, like copyright infringement. And so all of this means, because of the sort of a variety of different causes of action, including breach of contract, you need to move in provincial court when you're in Canada. So that would be in the Ontario Superior Court in this case, because she's going to Ontario.
So why do you say that's the appropriate court?
So in Canada, if you're going to be enforcing a contract, or you're going to be bringing an action for misappropriation of trade secrets, it must be done in the provincial courts. We do have a federal court system, which is a specialized court for patents and trademarks and copyright cases. But if we're in the trade secret space, we go to provincial court.
Now, we don't expect Ethel to hang around in Canada for very long. What do you recommend to try to stop her from leaving? What can we do to try to get the documents back?
So the key is to move as quickly as possible. So while Ethel's on that flight, we are busy preparing court application materials to get an injunction to stop her from doing anything else with the materials, and a seizure order to actually take possession of the materials. And so we would prepare these materials, we would work with the head of security to get an affidavit quickly drawn up, and we would get in front of a judge as quickly as possible. And the courts in Ontario will hear urgent applications where there is urgency, like in this case. And so it'd probably be an hour hearing in front of a judge. It'd be ex parte. We make this ex parte so we don't give notice to Ethel, otherwise she might dispose of the materials. And so we get in front of the judge, we get the order that requires her to give us the materials back, and to not use any information she may have for any other purposes. And that's important, because it means we've prevented the information from getting into Megatron's hands, and we've preserved the evidence for an ultimate trial.
So you could done all this. You're at the airport. So what happens if she just walks past you and doesn't comply?
So with civil orders for seizure, you can't physically grab the materials out of her hands. You cannot do that. You have to ask for voluntary compliance. And if she refuses and disobeys that order and walks away, you then go back to the court. And again, you'll get in front of a judge quickly, and you will seek a contempt of court order. And with a contempt of court order, you can then move forward to try and have her arrested and have the materials seized that way.
Okay, thank you. Now, is this the same in all provinces? And I'm not sure if Tina's online or not, but maybe Naeem comment a little bit, or Michael can comment. If Tina's not here. I think there are different scenarios in different provinces they may have access to.
Yeah, I mean, and Michael can comment a bit further, but obviously, as Michael was saying, because contractual law is a provincial matter, there are some nuances. I think, though, that from an enforcement standpoint, when I speak with my litigation colleagues, the idea is not necessarily to rely on those nuances, but work with this multi-pronged approach, right? As Ivy was talking about in terms of criminal or civil actions. Michael, I don't know if you'd like to add something to this.
I would only add that in Quebec, you have the Quebec Civil Code, which is different than the common laws of the other provinces, but the Quebec Civil Code has available remedies and procedures for doing very similar to what I just described.
Thank you both. So unfortunately, I don't know how she did it. She gets wind of the fact that these things are going to be happening at the airport when she lands. And she got to the border and had all of this thing happening. She did not go to her family home. She immediately goes directly to the gate for a plane leaving to London. So we don't know yet if she's, going to stay there, but luckily we know this, and we have a colleague in London waiting for her. Who? What do you have waiting for Ethel if she arrives in Heathrow or Gatwick? We're gonna have to unmute him, but
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I was trying to unmute, but someone had a better idea to keep me quiet. So yeah, so my big moment. So okay, we know she's on the way over here, and we have 7 hours to get going to try and have a waiting party for her here. Now, it was good to hear from Michael as to all the steps that you can do in Canada, and perhaps not surprisingly, because both Canada and UK are Commonwealth countries and have a common law system. Pretty much the approach described by Michael in Canada can be followed here too. Now that's good because we can reuse much of the material Michael and his team has already prepared for Canada. So just like in Canada, we can likewise look to obtain an urgent search and seizure order on an ex parte basis. And like Michael, we would also most likely focus on there being acts of copyright infringement by bringing the stolen goods into the UK. And we would also raise the issue of breach of confidence too. We would look to obtain an order as to search and seizure of the stolen property, and the UK having jurisdiction, since importing the thumb drive and the paperwork and possibly the laptop as well, having copies of Optimus's original documents on, will be an act of infringement of copyright in its own right. And given Ethel's behaviour to date, and the fact that Megatron have an office in London, there must be a real risk that she is going to pass on the materials to Megatron there. Now, of course, we know that Ethel has managed to slip the net before, and so she may well run from the service of the search and seizure order. And even if we have a police officer present when we execute the order, she may know that the police officer can't actually carry out a search of her luggage and person. However, having said that, experience does show that the presence of a police officer when you execute one of these orders does have a sobering effect on the perpetrator. But, it may not work, and so we do have to come up with a different plan as well. That's not to say we wouldn't go for the search and seizure order. We would still do that because there's every possibility she may well think that the temperature is too hot and decide to comply. And also, if she does breach the search and seizure order, as in Canada, we can get a warrant for her arrest, and then that could be executed by the local police. And once she's arrested, the goods are hopefully secure. But I'm not saying that is easy. So whilst we have one team in place getting the search and seizure order, we will at the same time have another team getting a meeting with the police at Heathrow. As a port of entry into the UK, Heathrow is actually probably the one that has the highest police presence. And so our chance of getting the interest and attention of officers there is pretty good. We would explain that we're looking at executing a search and seizure order at arrivals, and knowing what sensitive places airports are, we will need to probably do very little to convince the police that they should be present to ensure there's no breach of the peace, and also to make sure that other users of the airport are not caused concern by any resulting commotion. However, this is also where Plan B comes in. We will also look to explain to the police that there is also a crime being committed on UK soil as soon as Ethels passes through customs and into the UK. That crime is handling stolen goods, which is an offence under our Theft Act. In line with much of UK criminal law, there is extraterritorial reach to some extent. For something to be stolen goods in the UK, the theft can take place anywhere. But to convince the police that Ethel will have stolen goods on her, we will need more evidence than, say, what was covered off in the evidence for the search and seizure order. We will need to have as much evidence as possible to show the goods are stolen. The goods are stolen and also considered to be stolen in China or Canada, which is where ultimately, I guess, the property is owned. So I would use the CCTV recordings that were obtained in China. I'd also try to get evidence as to the ownership of the manual, the laptop, and it was a company thumb drive as well. And here we want to be able to also identify these objects. So anything we can get to actually identify these objects would be useful to give to the police. To explain the seriousness to the police, we would refer to the witness evidence we already have as to the value of the trade secrets, and that there is a concern they're going to end up with a competitor or elsewhere outside of the UK. And we would also obviously need to provide the police with a good description of Ethel so that they can make identification of her. We're not expecting her to respond to any tannoy requests for her to go to customer services, for example. Now, when working with the police, it's important to remember that they are human. And so it's very necessary to be sensitive to this, and it's helpful to be aware of that so you can engage their interest. We also need to be respectful and sympathetic to the fact that they have other demands. But the aim that we should have is so that the officers can make an assessment that they have reasonable grounds to suspect a crime is being committed on UK soil. And that will be enough for them to make an arrest and search. Now, as part of this assessment, the police will have to consider whether it is in the public interest to see if the search and seizure order is complied with first, or whether they should make an arrest straight away. One thing the police will be conscious of is that it may not be fair to offer one option to Ethel and then if she doesn't comply with the search and seizure order, and then arrest her in respect of the stolen property. So that is one reason why the police may just arrest in relation to the handling of the stolen goods. Now that may frustrate the execution of our search and seizure order, but at least we know the laptop, the manual, the other paperwork and the thumb drive are safe, at least for the time being. If though we don't go down that plan B and we rely on the search and seizure order, we will sort of follow the course that took place in Canada. And if she complies, that's good. If she doesn't comply, then we will need to go and get a committal order and a warrant for her arrest, and then try and get that enforced as quickly as possible. And hopefully before she leaves the airport, or maybe for somewhere else, or for Megatron's offices in London. So that's what we're hoping we would get her by now.
Well, I guess it depends on the back situation. So I don't know how Ethel does trade. But unfortunately, she wasn't caught in China. She wasn't caught in Canada. I'm sorry, Hugh, but you were just too slow. I have no idea.
I think she was wearing a good disguise.
I don't know what happens to these airports and airport security, but somehow she, the connection was too close or something, and she makes her way to Paris, which is Megatron's head office. And she situates herself in an apartment, a company apartment in Megatron, and presumably starts working there. So now we think she's probably going to be there for a while. And luckily, we have our colleague in Paris who is ready for her, Celine Day, and perhaps you can let us know what you can do in France.
Yes. Is it okay? Yes, so Anita, as Mrs. Lin now is in France and has started working for Megatron French company, obviously the French court would have jurisdiction over the matter. And in France, we have a specific law on trade secret that was adopted in 2018, and it originates from a European directive dated 2016. So more or less, we have the same provision and same law protecting trade secret over all European Union countries. And this legislation includes the possibility of requesting the application of very effective and rapid measures to prevent infringement of trade secret, or to put an end to such infringement if it has already occurred. So the first thing that Optimus would have to check is whether the information, the manufacturing process, can qualify as a trade secret under this directive, under this law. And to summarize, there are three conditions for an information to be qualified as trade secret. The first one is that the information must not be generally known to the industry sector. The second one is that it must have a commercial value. And the third one is that the owner of the trade secret must have taken protective measure, of course, to keep the information secret. So in our case scenario, we've seen that obviously the manufacturing process can qualify trade secret under French law. So what can Optimus do? Two things. First thing, they would have to, in my view, secure evidence of the fact that Mrs. Lin holds the trade secrets, and then it could apply for preliminary injunction before the French court. So to secure evidence, Optimus can apply before the French court to obtain an authorization from the judge to be allowed to go to Mrs. Lin's apartment and to go as well to Megatron's headquarters, what we call, in patent cases, it's called the infringement seizure. But for trade secret, we can well also do those type of done raids. So a bailiff with the police can come to Mrs. Lin's apartment and investigate. So they'll be allowed to seize the thumb drive and to investigate in her laptops and everything in order to secure evidence of the misappropriation of the trade secret, and also to find proof of Megatron's involvement. So we know that she will be working with the French company, but we have no proof so far. So if we manage to find this proof, we can well go as well to Megatron's headquarters, investigate the same with bailiff, police, and try to find if there has been a use already of the trade secret or not. And when we have all this evidence, Optimus can apply for a preliminary injunction, even in very urgency. So in 1-2 weeks can obtain a preliminary injunction to prevent Mrs. Lin or Megatron or both to use the trade secret. But this would be a preliminary injunction. So Optimus would obviously have to go on the merits. In a very short delay, so 30 days, they will have to go on the merits to confirm the preliminary injunction. And there, as in other countries, it could be civil action, or it could well be criminal action. And this is not in the trade secret law, but under French law, criminal law. Of course, the theft of data and the concealment of data, so the fact of holding a trade secret, can be punished by the criminal code. So Optimus would have the choice between the two.
Well, thank you. And thanks, Ivy and Hugh and Michael and Celine for providing their insights. This is great. I am glad to report that after all of this, Ethel's lock ran out, and so did Megatron's. We were able to secure the documents and the USB key and stop them from using the valuable information and trade secrets.